Okay, this is a consuming resources question, question 3. Firstly, again, it's a data response, and it says study figure 2. Compare the amount of electricity generated from renewable resources in Brazil and the USA. So we need to find Brazil, here it is, and we need to find the USA. We look at the colours of their respective countries, and we can see that in Brazil, they're making 80 to 100% of their energy from renewable resources. That's from biofuel, from growing essentially fuel that gets refined into ethanol, compared to the USA, where we're seeing 0 to 19.9%, and that's because they're heavily reliant on oil, and their economy is very much focused on car ownership and fossil fuels. Okay, so that's an easy 2 marks there. You don't need to add those explanations if it's only a described question, but that's just giving you a bit of context. Next one, lots of you had a go at this but put the wrong diagram in. Describe the Malthusian theory about the relationships between population and resources. So Malthus is the one we want to know about, and we want to know about the relationship between population and resources. Again, if it says you use a diagram, that should be a strong indication that you should do that. So the diagram you're looking for is very simply 2 axes. We're going to show that global population going up exponentially, and we're going to show food supply or resources staying pretty static. We might let it move up a little bit, but basically we've got a limited amount of food on our planet. We're going to put some axes in here, so we'll put resources and population on this side, and we'll put time in here. I'm going to show that moving that way and that moving that way. Now, the key thing here is that Malthus said when population outstrips food supply and resources, we're going to get a problem. We're going to get a crisis point, and there will either be a human or a natural check that will bring population back down to the amount of resources that the world has and the food supply that can supply those people. So he talked about natural checks and he talked about human checks. Natural checks are things like famines. They might be things like diseases, perhaps epidemics and breakouts, those kind of things, Ebola and such like. And human checks, and that's going to be things like resource war, it might be conflict, and it could be any of those things that might bring down human population, but mainly it's probably going to be human conflict. Okay, so all you have to do there is you have to describe how that graph works. Population exponential. Resources, we put them going up a little bit because we always invent new ways of doing things, but when you get to that crisis point, we're either going to have a human check or a natural check, and that's going to bring population back down to the level that's sustainable with our resources. Okay, right, question number 2. That was a big question, that first one, which has 6 marks. The second one, explain how national and local governments attempt to manage resource consumption. This is quite a tricky question, but it does very much relate to your controlled assessments which you've just done on Ipswich. So what are national governments doing to manage resources, and what are local governments doing? Well, national governments, what we can do is we can look at taxation. So we can think about things like car tax, road tax, putting heavier levies on things like 4x4s. We can look at government energy policy. So we can try to change the balance from being heavily on fossil fuels towards more renewables and sustainable sources. The government can also put in strong targets for local governments in terms of recycling and in terms of increasing their sustainability. In terms of local governments, that's where we can really get into all of our things that we learned about in our controlled assessment. So we can look at recycling schemes, we can look at cycle lanes, we can think about the eco footprint of cities. What can we do to change the behaviour of people in the localities to actually reduce resource consumption? Lots of ways of doing that. As I said, heavy investment in public transport. We can look at things like congestion charging. We could look at parking restrictions. We can look at fitness schemes. All the kind of things that we learned about in our control assessment to reduce resource consumption, we could add in here. Because it's a 6 marker, you should be adding in case studies. And I strongly advise you to put in things that you learn on your secondary research for your controlled assessment, such as you trekked in Holland. Perhaps you might want to look at places like Copenhagen, the most sustainable city in the in Europe. And then you might want to contrast that with London or with Ipswich, which we know a lot about. You should all be able to get 6 marks on that because you've done such a lot of work based on your controlled assessment.